You're watching Let the Quran Speak. Recent Pew Research on Muslims across the world found that Muslims are united in their core beliefs and practices, but have widely differing views about many other aspects of their faith, including how important religion is to their lives, who counts as a Muslim, and what practices are acceptable in Islam. We'll be exploring the results of the survey now. Here with me, Brother Shabir Ali, President of the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, I don't know if you've had a chance to read the entire report. It's very long. But it shows some startling things. It shows that many Muslims across the world are united in their understanding of the core beliefs of Islam. Beliefs like believing in God and the Messenger, believes in the angels and the books, things like this.
Yes, I've read the executive summary. It's a very interesting report, and of course it is based on a very broad survey of
38,000 interviews.
Yes.
In 80 different languages.
Yes. So the results are important, and they're worth studying. They help us to understand better who are Muslims and what their views are.
So it primarily looked at Muslims from different parts of the world and tried to show what are the similarities and differences. Are there any that stuck out to you, that leapt out at you as interesting?
I think most of this result is compatible with what we already know generally, that Muslims are united by certain core beliefs and practices, and at the same time there is a certain diversity in the way in which Muslims view their faith, their level of commitment to the faith, and their views of various sects and movements within the faith.
It showed that across the board Islam is very important to Muslims, but it showed that within communist countries or previously communist countries that importance is a little bit diminished.
Naturally, in places in the world where religion is important to people in general, and naturally Muslims in those areas will find some influence from their environment, and they themselves will consider Islam to be important. And the opposite is also true in areas in which people generally do not find their faith to be important. Muslims are children of the same social atmosphere as much as other people are, and some of that will reflect on them as well. Though that formula is not to be taken as being absolute, in that you may find that in some situations where people do not take their faith seriously, Muslims in those areas may in fact distinguish themselves by their commitment to their faith. What is more so and more noticeable is that where Muslims live in majority Muslim countries, they tend to be complacent about their faith, and the very same Muslims would come to, let's say, Canada or the United States of America and suddenly become very much interested in their own faiths, and that the reason for this disparity in the individual behavior may be that you are complacent with your faith in a certain circumstance, but you come to a new environment where you live as a minority, and suddenly you realize how different your faith is to what is around you, and how important it is to you, and you're afraid of losing it in some way, and so you hold on to it more tightly. So this might explain why some Muslims become more devout when they in fact arrive on foreign shore.
What do you think of the generational differences found? The survey found that in many countries, people 35 and up were more religious than people who were younger. And this was most pronounced in the Middle East and North Africa.
Yeah, I think
is this a troubling statistic?
No, it is not troubling and not even surprising. Okay. I think this is natural. As way back as the time of Socrates, we know that there is the generational gap. Young people are more interested in the things that give them fun in this life, the things that are fun to do in terms of physical pleasure and personal enjoyment. And the yearning towards things spiritual, in fact, is very common in people who are 35 and over. By the time you get close to 40, the Quran marks off 40 as an age when somebody might be summoned to prophethood, for example. And in Islamic tradition, it was very well known that 40 is a hallmark. It marks a kind of transition. A person is going now into later life. And as we move into later life, we are conscious of our proximity to the grave. We realize that we're heading towards eternity. People become closer to God. They're looking more towards that spectrum of things rather than back towards the temporary pleasures of this life. So there's this natural disparity between the youth and the older folk. And it's not only Islam that is affected by this. As I said, way back as the time of Socrates, it's known that people will be more spiritual and reflective in older years than they will be in their teenage and young years.
Mm-hmm. Now, the survey also found that men and women are similarly religious, but that women don't tend to go to mosques as much. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, in some parts of the world, especially in Southeast Asia, we find it widely the practice in, let's say, Pakistan and India, for example, that women do not go to the mosques. In fact, in some areas, they would be barred from entering the mosque. And some would justify this by referring to the statement of Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him, where it is reported that she said that if the Prophet had seen the women of our time, he would have prevented them from coming to the mosque. But others see that we cannot just build the ruling on Aisha's statement here, even if this is genuinely credited to her. Meaning that it may not really be her statement at all, because why would she say something that is contrary to what is known as the practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him? But even if she actually said this, then the ruling that is more general and universal should depend on the known practice of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself. And it is known for a fact that in his lifetime, women attended the mosques, and they attended the mosque in his presence. He led them, he spoke to them, he went directly to the area where the women prayed, and he addressed them directly. So he, as an imam or a leader, could see them and they could see him. And his associate Bilal, the muazzin, stood by his side as he addressed the women. In fact, he leaned on Bilal for support as he spoke to them. And it is even mentioned that Bilal spread his sheet and the women were donating in charity by peeling off their earrings and other jewelry and throwing them onto that cloth which Bilal had spread. Mm-hmm. So given all of this, and even more reports showing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, interacted with women in the mosque, it is clear that there is no prohibition in Islam against a woman attending the mosque. And in fact, that seems to be the natural situation, that she, with other believers, will attend the mosque, and that is how they will be educated. Especially in times past when books were not available and the internet was not available. The way in which the Muslim community were educated or was educated is by the individuals going to the mosques, listening to the sermons, and joining in other circles of instruction in the mosque.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think of the Sunni Shiite split? The survey found that in majority Sunni countries, only half of the individuals thought that Shiites were Muslims.
Except in those countries where the Shiites and Sunnis do live side by side, together. And there is
like Lebanon or Iraq.
Exactly. That shows the difference that the situation could cause in a person's thinking. Those who live side by side with persons of the other sect would more likely consider them to be Muslim, because why not? We know them to be Muslim. They believe in the same God, many of the same things we believe in. They practice many of the same practices like praying and fasting and so on. So why not? But in some parts of the world where Shi'is are more distant from the Sunni dominant community, people may tend to think of the other as being foreign and different and strange and even out of the fold of Islam. And then there are some clerics as well who go propagating the idea that Islam is a single view and there is only one thing called Islam, and it's only our view that is the Islamic view, and everything else is odd and to be shunned, and even that the other things are outside of the pale of Islam. So you might even find a preacher on TV in some parts of the Muslim world warning against the Shiites, as though this is a separate operate in different religion. Now, of course, if something is different, we should not be afraid to speak the truth about it. But at the same time, we notice two things. First, that divisiveness among Muslims is a loss of our strength. And the Quran speaks about this. In the 8th chapter of the Quran says, وَلَا تَنَازَوْا فَتَفْشَلُوا وَتَذْهَبَ رِيحُكُمْ. Do not dispute among themselves, otherwise you will fail and your power will depart from among you. And this precisely is what has happened to us due to this kind of internecine conflict between and among Muslims. The second thing is that if you look carefully at the Sunni-Shi'i split, you realize that this split has much more to do with politics than about theology. In terms of theology, we believe basically the same thing, we practice basically the same thing, but there's been a political difference. The difference being on the question of who will succeed the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a political leader, as the caliph after the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now, it is true that that difference led to some theological spin-offs as well, but these theological issues can be reconciled when we realize that at the heart of it is that political split, and in sum, we are really one faith.
All right, unfortunately we have to go for break, so thank you for that, Brother Shabir.
You're welcome.
We'll take a break, and when we return, we answer questions we've received from you, our viewers.